Hello, this is Professor McLaughlin. I am going to give you a lecture on Chapter 1, which will hopefully set you up for a successful start to this online course. As you know, the summer courses are very compressed. There's a lot of information that's in the book, in Learn Smart, in all the work that you're going to do on Connect. And I like to give this lecture in order to help kind of direct your reading and give you maybe an approach to business law through this overview chapter. I will not be lecturing on every chapter. I know for some of you, for people who have been teaching online courses for a while, they'll have a voice audio lecture for every chapter. We don't have that yet for Management 12A, but we're working on it, and this will be, I will share with you some of my other lectures, but what I plan to do this summer is just lecture on the courses that, the chapters that I find students have the most difficulty with. Okay, so I'm going to skip some of these early slides, just the case hypotheticals and things that will probably be done in class but not online. So what I want you to think of for a moment as you listen to this lecture is what separately are the definitions of business and law? What defines business? And let's think about that for a minute. And then let's think for a minute separately, what defines law? And then put them together. So business is merchants, goods, manufacturing, services, trade, markets, exchanges, agreements, getting things done in order to make a profit, getting things done in order to build relationships with vendors, building relationships with banks, signing agreements. That's what business is. And what's law? Outside of business, what's law? Law is doing an investigation on international soccer by the U.S. Department of Justice. And that will be U.S. law, international law to some extent, international law that if you're not familiar with the arrests and charges that are currently going on in the soccer world. It's a great thing to watch. It's a great thing to watch. When I first heard about it, I was like, all right, why FIFA? Was the NFL behind this because the world watches too much soccer and we want to watch American football? And then I read in the Wall Street Journal that it had come up accidentally through some other financial investigations or tax investigations, and that they never intended originally to find so much corruption. They didn't go after FIFA specifically. It was just incidental to some other financial investigation and corruption investigations. And the U.S. Department of Justice is federal, so that's federal law. And also, we don't talk a lot about politics in this class. The book doesn't cover it. I don't do it in my in-class lectures. You know, politics is always there, just like your health is always there. I mean, it's really incidental to business law. Yes, when we get into a couple of chapters, when you look at how judges are elected, that's political. The U.S. Supreme Court can be very political, but we don't concentrate on that. That's a everyday reality that businesses must deal with. But our purpose is to live in the bubble of community college land and say that we're going to focus on understanding how business and law intersect. But anyway, so what is law? Law is a set of rules. Law can be an understanding. Law can be how my agreement with a vendor is enforceable, whether it's valid as defined by the law. Law can affect what I can do as an employer to my employees. It can affect, it can be case law. It can be statutory law. It can be treaties, executive actions, which are allowed under the U.S. Constitution. It can be the U.S. Constitution, the California Constitution. Some really interesting things that the Obama administration has done with executive orders, which are very valid, and until they are determined to be unconstitutional, executive orders bypass President Obama's executive orders regarding immigration and kind of changing status for millions of illegal immigrants recently is now going slowly through the federal court system to determine if it's constitutional or not. And that has a definite effect on business. I mean, the FIFA and soccer example has a worldwide effect on business. Corruption at that level, you'll have agreements, well, the World Cup, wherever the next one is, I can't remember, but those rental agreements and licensing for media and how it's going to be watched on television and the internet, all those commercial agreements will be affected by these corruption charges. Are they valid? Are they binding? If someone who entered into the agreement was found to be charged with corruption and is now in jail, is that agreement still valid? What does international law say? That kind of thing. So law affects the business world in a very definitive way. And then finally, getting back to the Obama executive action on immigration, President Obama announced that executive action. It went into effect within 3 to 6 months. And by Christmas of last year, people were going to the DMV in California and getting licenses, changing their status, maybe getting jobs. How do employers treat those individuals? If that action is declared ultimately unconstitutional, how will that affect businesses who have hired those persons? Those persons are currently working, all kinds of things. So business and law together, they particularly in the United States, have a very close and intimate relationship. We regulate business a lot. The state of California regulates business quite a bit. And many of our everyday activities are affected by laws that regulate business. And then the other thing I think you'll find when you go through this course is that a lot of the examples in the book could be used for you in your everyday life as well, or you at your job, as well as from a employer or business perspective. So we'll spend a little time in the short time that we have together also switching perspectives. So you don't always want to put yourself in the position of the of perhaps who you are, a student. You want to imagine yourself, and many of you may be business owners, But we want to flip around so that we can exercise those analytical muscles to put ourselves in the position of a judge who's faced with a business dispute. How should it be decided? What am I as a judge bound by? Where does fairness come in? If the law ultimately results in something unfair, do I have any leeway? Putting yourself in the position of the business owner, the employer, the corporation, as well as the employee and the air quotes, the little guy who may be hurt by business activity or hurt by a particular set of business rules or laws. So being able to switch that perspective and see something from, let's put it in legal terms, from maybe opposing counsel's view or the bad guy's view. Corporations are profit driven. Is it wrong when they put profits first? And certainly shareholders want them to put profits first. So we'll do a little bit of that, and you'll see when you get to chapter 2, or actually the appendix to chapter 1. I encourage you to look at that ability to walk through legal analysis and really try and remain as objective as possible will help you if you are taking this course in order to obtain a business degree, become a business person and work in business. Being familiar with legal analysis and the ability to identify issues, understand what rules affect the issue. Let's just use the FIFA example. I'm so sorry it's boring. I'm still on the same slide, but I'm kind of on a roll here. What is the issue with corruption in FIFA? The issue is that officials were found to have violated various rules. What are those rules? I don't honestly know. I really want to spend some time looking at some of the news articles. I haven't seen what the exact charges are, but maybe, I don't know, let's guess. There was some money laundering or bribery, which would violate Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And if U.S. banks were used, let's ask another question. How does the U.S. even have jurisdiction over anybody in FIFA? So we need to begin to think of that. And in the U.S. law, you have to find some connection between the act and the U.S. in order to give a U.S. court, a U.S. federal court, jurisdiction to hear this dispute. And maybe there were some international rules that were broken and that are able to be tried in U.S. courts. So what's the issue? What were the rules? What were the corruption charges exactly? What did they violate? And then begin to look at the facts, and we want to apply those facts to these rules. Did the official use U.S. banks? Were federal wires involved? With federal wires would be, was there a wire transfer? Did they do online banking that went through any U.S. broadband connection that could then tie that activity to the United States and give a federal court jurisdiction over it? And then ultimately, we always in legal analysis want to come to a conclusion and say, how do we think the court's going to hold? Do we think these individuals, and this is all criminal law, which, look, we don't focus a lot on criminal law. Mostly business law is what we call civil law. And let me forward some of the slides so we can get into that kind of stuff. But there's the fun and exciting stories, I'm sorry to say, but it's true, are the criminal ones where, and typically in business law in the United States, if you're looking at somebody going to jail, it's a criminal penalty for a violation of a civil law, like securities fraud and that kind of thing. Okay, moving on. So how do we organize our thinking? And this is a nice little activity I like to go through. So the big bullet points are functional areas of business. Corporate management, that's a functional area of a corporation. Someone needs to run it. The executives do. And then next bullet point, production and transportation. It's a fundamental area of many businesses. I manufacture, I produce something, I need to ship it. I need to send it to a distributor, and then I need to have an agreement with that distributor. What laws affect that? And then finally, sorry, marketing majors. I don't think marketing is silly, but there aren't a ton of laws that affect marketing until you get into, I mean, mostly it's going to be false advertising. But then when you got the internet and social media and Twitter and corporations having Facebook pages and things that are said on it and pictures that are put on it, then marketing gets a little legally interesting. Obviously, it's very interesting outside of law in terms of creativity and, amazing ads that are funny and touching and all that kind of stuff. So JK on the marketing is silly. So corporate management, what areas affect this part of the business? Always human resources law. You got an employee, I don't care if he's an executive or somebody working in the plant, human resources law, employment law, maybe even labor law. Corporate law, do they own shares? Do the executives own shares? Are they going to do insider trading? Are they, if they're a publicly traded corporation, are they doing proper disclosures required by the Securities and Exchange Commission? So what these next couple of slides do is help you look at business. We want to understand that various divisions, various things that businesses do are going to be impacted by different areas of business law. So moving on, production and transportation. How different and diverse is that from the corporate suite? Very, very, very different. So we're putting things on trucks. Are my trucks at the proper emissions level? Are my trucks complying with California environmental law and federal environmental law? Are my trucks crossing a state line? Are my goods getting shipped internationally? And then you'll have a whole new set of regulations, U.S. and international regulations that are going to affect production and transportation. And then labor agreements, very, very different area of the law. I don't think we cover that chapter this summer. But collective bargaining agreements, unions, very much a part of the production and transportation side of many businesses. So then just a quick kind of breakdown under marketing, online privacy issues, social media rules will affect that. Now, how about these? What functional, what laws might apply to these functional areas of business? Research and development. So think about a pharmaceutical company who has an agreement with a local university or does animal testing or needs to go to the Food and Drug Administration to begin trials or finish trials, or their patent is up and now the drug is generic. So research and development, that kind of went a little far afield, but research and development really is focusing on the development, seeking licenses or permissions you may need if you're creating something, but also just funding research. Pharmaceutical is just the best example of that. Maybe in the petrochemical, you'll get some research and development as well. Accounting and finance, another big functional area of business that has become even more regulated than it previously was. So after the Enron crisis, we saw Sarbanes-Oxley being passed. After our recent credit crisis, the Dodd-Frank Financial Protection Act was passed. So accounting and finance. So for finance, we're going to focus on raising funds through the secondary markets or privately raising funds, maybe financing through banks. So banking law would affect that. And then human resource management. What can you do to employees? What kind of protections do employees have? And for each of these, we want to begin to understand that there are state laws that affect business, and then separate, maybe very similar, but maybe very different, federal laws that affect business. So we want to begin to also always ask, well, is this law federal or is it state? And as a business, you have to comply with everything. But because the U.S. Constitution is the #1 most supreme law of the land, and we'll see that in Chapter 5 when we take a look at the Constitution and the Supremacy Clause, states can not regulate in areas that the federal government has said this is federal only. So bankruptcy law is federal only. States do have some bankruptcy laws that the feds have allowed them to pass, and it's very specific stuff. I don't want to confuse you at this early stage, but maybe environmental law is the better example. California has lots of environmental laws that cannot interfere with the federal laws, and cannot negate a federal law, but can work alongside federal environmental laws. And what's really super interesting, having said all that, was if the federal law is supreme, as the Constitution says, then how are we regulating medical marijuana? Just a very interesting disconnect there, with the states, many states regulating quite differently what the federal government has called a Class 1 drug. I can't explain it. It's why it's kind of different and fun to look at what different states do, because it's there's really same-sex marriage is the only other example where we're really struggling with states regulating things differently, and causing conflicts with other parts of the Constitution. Okay, moving on. So what's the purpose of law anyway? What does it do? It can provide order. Having access to the courts is an alternative to punching someone in the head or another kind of altercation. Filing a lawsuit, suing somebody, getting a temporary restraining order, preventing them from removing inventory. All of these facilitate a resolution of disputes that's not pistols at dawn. Sometimes students don't agree with bullet point 3, facilitating a sense that change is possible. And I think over your lifetime, you may begin to appreciate, and if we had time to go to the history of civil rights in America, even though we have a long, long way to go, many things have changed across the board, and not just in terms of race. Civil rights has to do with gender, has to do with age, has to do with national origin, has to do with religion and discrimination in many, many different forms. A lot of change in the United States through the law has never been accomplished in other countries. And encouraging social justice. So social justice is something I think it's important for you as potential business people to understand, because I believe it's what's driving our focus on requiring businesses to care more about the environment, requiring businesses kind of this idea that the millennials, whose growing workforce numbers, choose a life balance over pay frequently, forcing employers to provide better benefits, kind of changing the what previously had been, you're lucky to have a job here, changing kind of a perspective that you may need to treat your employees differently. You may need to have flexibility in your rules in terms of hours and shifts. Social justice also is part of sustainability, and corporations understanding that not just from environmental but ethical standpoint, that they are a global citizen and they are a citizen and they have responsibilities just like other citizens to care about what happens when we're all gone from the planet, to care about what they're currently doing locally, domestically, and internationally in terms of paying a fair wage, that kind of thing. So social justice is a much broader concept of right and wrong and how law can help society achieve that through regulation and sometimes case law. In the United States, for sure, the Constitution guaranteed some personal freedoms that previous to the U.S. Constitution, people on this continent did not have. And then serving as a moral guide, I would say sometimes. Sometimes law can be amoral, meaning not morally laden, but I frequently, I encourage you as you read the book to, I want to use this word, I don't know if it's the right word, but begin to perceive or begin to understand how U.S. business law is frequently morally laden. And so for my international students, I would love to hear from you if you notice any laws in this book that are very different from what you see for business in your home countries. And for my U.S. students, the same thing. I mean, certainly, not certainly, you may begin to see, particularly in Chapter 2, that there is frequently a heavy Christian overlay to U.S. business law. And while we profess to being very, very secular, sometimes law can be very morally laden and from a particular perspective. Sorry. Okay. How is law categorized? So now these next couple of slides really going to help you with vocabulary, and law loves to be put into boxes. So you specialize in law, you have a particular area that you practice in. We already saw from functional business areas have different areas of law that affect them. So I encourage you as you move through the course, law works very well with outlines, with tables, beginning to understand what groups law belongs to, or particular laws belong to, may help you understand the law as well. Oh, here's my Law Loves Boxes slide. So sorry. So sensitive, this little button. Okay, so law can be classified as private or public. Private is the law that affects us when we're dealing with one another, private groups or individuals. So I have an agreement with a vendor to deliver Twinkies to my store on the 30th of every month, and I pay a certain amount, and they didn't deliver in the second month. What are my rights to recover? Can I cancel the agreement? Can I get refunded my money? That kind of thing. So private law will affect that. Public law involves disputes between private individuals or groups and their government. So public law can be human rights law. It can be, that's the best example. Public law can be criminal law. And I think those are two good examples. So then we have two more classifications of law. Civil law, which is family law, probate when you die, or probate court when maybe you have a child situation where an individual is an orphan, and probate court, or you need to declare guardianship over somebody. Family law, did I already say that? Most law, I don't want to say most law is civil law. Let's put it this way. Most law that business needs to be aware of and business does function under is going to be in civil law. Employment law is civil. Environmental law is civil, but it can have a criminal penalty. Criminal law is something very different. It's a law that we've written where someone commits an act against the public. So we criminalize stuff, and it's the same concept behind criminally penalizing certain activities. When an activity threatens society as a whole, we are able to create a criminal penalty for it. So hate crimes have a criminal penalty. Some environmental activities can have a criminal penalty. And clearly the most obvious criminal laws, murder, theft, burglary, you'll have a criminal penalty. And the reason the district attorney's office prosecutes is because the district attorney's office represents the public as a whole. We designate that office to prosecute criminals because they've violated something that we determined as a society threatens all of us. So civil law, family law, bankruptcy, civil, environmental law, civil, criminal law, murder, arson, theft, other bad things. So where do we find business law? We find it in constitutions, U.S. and state. We find it in statutes. Statutes are also called code provisions, also called regulations. So I encourage you to spend some time with the vocabulary. It's a different language, it really is, which is why reading the book is super helpful and going through Learn Smart is super helpful, because progressively working through each chapter, you're acquiring that language yourself. Business law is also found in cases. So when the Supreme Court decides something, when the FIFA officials go to U.S. federal court and are tried, if they're found guilty, that will be case law. And that decision in that case will be binding on subsequent cases. Now, administrative law is something very important for businesses, but very separate from the first three bullet points. Administrative law, I want you to think about the Internal Revenue Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, what else? The Federal Communications Commission, which now regulates the internet. These are administrative agencies which Congress created through its power to manage particular areas of societies, or our lives and our businesses. So the Internal Revenue Service can promulgate laws, it can pass laws and rules and regulations, and and it doesn't have to go through Congress to do it. So administrative law is a very different kind of law, and what you'll begin to notice as you read the cases and read the book is that your right to disagree with the IRS, we already know, is very limited, and that's okay, as opposed to your right to disagree with someone who committed a crime against you. It immediately goes to court. So administrative law, I want you to put it in its own special bucket, in its own special bubble. We'll continue to talk about it throughout the summer, because business has to deal with it. You have to deal with getting inspected. You have to deal with health and safety inspections, dealing with fines if you violate environmental laws. And it's not the California legislature that does it. It's the California Environmental Protection Agency, and potentially the Federal Environmental Protection Agency as well, which is why sometimes it's expensive to be a business, because you have to hire lawyers or understand what the rules are that govern you and comply with them. So treaties are law, and that's a source of business law, and executive orders, as we mentioned previously. There's my nice little slide about administrative law. I forget I made some of these slides. So the next two slides I'll let you look at. These are really, it's just an exhibit from your book, and it just lists the federal administrative agencies. You have independent agencies and executive agencies, and what distinguishes them is whether the president appoints the person who's in charge. Independent agency, the president doesn't. Executive agency, president does. That makes it different, right? That makes it maybe a little bit more political, maybe particularly with, for example, the Veterans Administration, maybe making it more accountable to society, because we elect the president, and the president appoints someone to run these agencies. Maybe there's a sense of more accountability for that agency director. Okay, so there's this thing, it's called legal theory, and it's legal philosophy. And it's important to know about this because, this may be your one and only law course you take, I don't know. But we want to begin to explore the thinking behind some of the law and some of the philosophy behind law. Like, how did we choose making something criminal? How did we begin to understand that when a human hurts another human, that's a problem for the rest of us, right? How did we begin to make sense of that? And why isn't everything just civil? And how do we approach, from a philosophical standpoint, how do we approach passing law? How do we begin to understand very controversial things like terminating a pregnancy and women's rights to control their bodies, and same-sex marriage, which has lots of moral implications for some people? How do judges make those decisions? And so we have schools of jurisprudence, which are essentially separate legal philosophies. And it's good to know these things, partly because the U.S. Supreme Court, some of those individuals adhere to different schools of jurisprudence, and they make decisions based on their legal philosophy. And that may not be how you understand the law. It may not be how I understand the law, but they are the supreme last resort court in the country. And so understanding how they conceive of the law is really, really important. So quickly, I won't, hold on. I didn't mean to forward that slide. Quickly, let me hit highlight a couple of these. So natural law says that we were all born with a sense of what's right and wrong, that God created us, and yes, that's what natural law says, that we were given a sense of right and wrong at birth, and that everybody has an understanding that some things are just naturally wrong. For example, what's the first thing that pops in your head? What's fundamentally wrong? We all know it's wrong. Well, I don't have to pass a law to say it's wrong. It's just wrong. So usually students will come up with murder or rape. So terminating a life, violating somebody physically, we all understand that's wrong. And so what natural law says is, there are things we all know already because it was written on our hearts by God or written by the universe. They're things that are wrong. And so what I want you to do is you begin to read through the schools of jurisprudence. What's the upside of that? Yay, we all kind of agree that, killing each other is bad. Yay us, because the human race will go on if most of us believe that we should not be killing one another. What's the downside of that? Well, it's okay with things like murder, but it gets complicated. Is same-sex marriage natural law? Is that what we all understand, that everybody should be able to marry one another? And that's where you may begin to have trouble with certain natural law theories. Legal positivism and legal realism are very similar. Legal positivism is often called black letter law. I mean, you don't have to have a big theory about it. Whatever someone wrote down and said it's wrong, that's a black letter law, and we're just going to stick with that. We're going to say it's wrong and not analyze it too much. Identification with the vulnerable is kind of an approach to the law that there's an understanding that vulnerable people have a different context that we need to understand when we want to regulate them and when we find them in a dispute. So, for example, who's vulnerable in society? The elderly, children, the disabled. Those are three good ones. And then when those individuals show up in court, or when we want to regulate those individuals, we want to understand the context that they are in so that we pass the proper law, make a good decision regarding a dispute, as opposed to simply lumping everyone together and making decisions that are homogenous and not appreciating that the elderly, children, people with disabilities go through life a little differently than people without those vulnerabilities. And perhaps it's our duty to be able to appreciate that context when we pass laws or find them in the courtroom and have to pass a judgment against them. Okay, so you take a look, and then my other favorite one is cost-benefit analysis. So here, I'll give you a little mental activity for after I end this, kind of as the ending of this lecture. Think about the death penalty and what's a cost-benefit analysis. What's the benefit of having a death penalty? What's the cost of having a death penalty? And think about it from a financial standpoint, an emotional standpoint, a psychological standpoint. Think about it, do the cost-benefit analysis from the victim's family perspective, from the offender's perspective, the offender's family perspective. And cost-benefit analysis is very straightforward and is fun to do. with controversial topics. Okay, so this is the last slide. I'll leave it here. I hope this is a good starting off point. You need to read. There is no skipping the reading. Even if you do the Learn Smarts, reading the book, it just cannot be beat. I know it can, and use the glossary. There's a glossary in the textbook. Use that. If there are words you don't understand, Google them. There's a bunch of great free law dictionaries online. Some of it can be very tedious, but the cases, for the most part, are interesting. And what they do is they apply the law that you're learning in the chapters to a specific set of facts, and that's a great thing to understand how to do. Okay, so I will see you all online, and enjoy the first couple of chapters.